So we all know that the Boston Celtics have had an incredible regular season. They're the favorites to win the NBA title. They are far and away the best team in the Eastern Conference, but the extent to which those last two statements are true has to be discussed. And the reason I say that is because as the recording of this video, the Celtics are having a historically great regular season. Not necessarily in terms of individual wins, not necessarily in terms of their overall offensive and defensive rating, although both of those numbers are really impressive. Relative to the rest of their conference, this is the most dominant regular season that we have seen in the last 10 years in the NBA. And honestly, even relative to the overall wins that they're going to end up with, they're going to end up with between 65 to 66 wins. That's one of the best regular season records of all time. That's not quite on the level of the Warriors winning 72 or 73 games, but it's still unbelievably impressive. And by far the craziest part of this Celtics season is by the end of the year, there's a handful of games left as the recording of this video. By the end of the year, the Celtics are probably going to end up winning the Eastern Conference by over 15 games. They have a 15 game lead on the 2 seed on every other team in the conference as of the recording of this video. And that is unbelievably difficult to do. And again, just incredibly impressive, and also is kind of an indictment on the rest of the conference. And obviously we can talk about what makes the Celtics so good. I feel like that's a necessity to make this kind of video, to talk about why they are as good as they are. We've talked about this before. They're unbelievable defensively when their 5 guys are healthy. Tatum, Brown, White, Porzingis, and Jrue Holiday. When those 5 guys are playing, it's the best team in the league. It's the best 5-man lineup in the league. It's the most well-rounded group in the league. They're incredible on both ends of the floor. Short of incredible stretches by MVP caliber players like Luka and Jokic, that's the best 5-man unit that any team can put on the floor in the NBA. Arguably, when you account for the last couple of seasons of performances, that is 5 all-stars on the floor at once. Obviously, Derek White's more of a two-way guy. Jrue Holiday's not necessarily producing at all-star level, but there are stretches over the last few seasons that each of those guys have played like all-stars, and then the starting lineup on the best team in the entire league. And obviously, we've talked before about the volume of three-point shooting and how much that's going to impact how well Boston ends up playing in the postseason and where their season ultimately goes beyond the regular season. You could certainly argue that the way that they play is built to rack up regular season wins, and they've done an awesome job of doing that. But it has to be discussed how much of a lead they have in the Eastern Conference, because obviously the bar forever is for regular season success is going to be the wins record set by the Warriors, previously held by the Chicago Bulls. But when the rest of the conference is so far behind you, when even in the season in which the Warriors won 73 games, they had like a 7 or 8 game lead, I should say, in the conference, because San Antonio was also really good that year. Actually, I think it might have even been less than that. I think San Antonio won like 67 games, right? But to win 65 plus regular season games is a level of dominance that we don't see very often, and typically is an indicator of a team that is going to go on to either make the finals or win the title. And I think what's interesting is people aren't really talking about Boston as that kind of a regular season team. Like it's always going to be difficult to get into the discussion of the 72 win Bulls, 73 win Warriors, but the regular season dominance is being displayed. I don't really feel like is being discussed enough. Like the Celtics by season's end could have ended the season on a 15 game losing streak and still be the 1 seed in their conference. Like that is an unbelievable accomplishment. That's a sentence that doesn't even really make any sense. And as impressive as other teams have been in the Western Conference, the Nuggets, the Timberwolves, the Thunder, those teams are still probably going to be around 10 games behind where the Celtics have finished this season. And it's an interesting, kind of mindset to have, because Boston has still rested their guys plenty. It's not like they've tried to go out and set some kind of a wins record like the Warriors did. They've still done the load management thing. They've had injuries where KP missed some games and other guys have missed some games. They're just that good and they're just that dominant. And it's interesting as well to think about that in the context of an upcoming postseason run, right? Because there's a lot of pressure that comes with being the 1 seed. There's a lot of pressure that comes with having such a dominant regular season, especially within the Eastern Conference. And there's been some circumstances that have allowed Boston to have this much of a lead. I think even as good as their roster is, they're not 15 games better than every other team in the conference. They're significantly better than every other team in the conference, and I think the regular season certainly shows that, but they're not 15 games better. The Joel Embiid injury, obviously missing a huge portion of the year, hurt the Sixers' chances to potentially close down the gap for the 1 seed. Milwaukee's disaster of a season where they had a coach and then they fired a coach and they brought in Doc Rivers and they were good, and now they're not good again because they're the 2 seed in the conference right now. They're the team that is 15 games behind Boston. And then the East is it's just not as top heavy outside of Boston, but there's a lot of like good teams, right? Decent teams. Cleveland, the Knicks, who have had injury issues throughout the year that prevented them from being near the top of the standings, similar to what we talked about with Philadelphia. The Cavs, the Magic. There's a lot of different teams out there that are at least decent, that kind of hold down the rest of the group. And then obviously the Celtics are just just so much better right now than every other team. And I've talked on this channel before about the fact that I think Boston is the title favorite and should be the title favorite. But when I think about, them going into a finals matchup against any of what I believe currently to be the 4 best teams in the conference, regardless of how they finish the regular season, in the Western Conference, I should say, the Clippers, the Nuggets, the Thunder, and the Timberwolves, those 4 teams, there are universes in which any of those teams could certainly beat Boston in a potential finals matchup. And I think that is kind of where some of the lack of discussion about how good Boston has been during the regular season comes from, is people have a belief that part of what brings them so much regular season success, their dominant 5-man lineup, their incredible 3-point shooting, won't be as good potentially in certain matchups, especially against bigger teams. And then also in the postseason, the 3-point shooting will go down. And that's one of the biggest advantages in the regular season, is how well they shoot the ball, and that gap shrinks in the postseason. And I think that's one of the bigger reasons why people just haven't really had this discussion much about Boston, is because there are multiple teams, certainly in the Western Conference and potentially in the Eastern Conference, that could still certainly give them problems. And it's not as dominant as it felt when, for example, the Warriors were winning 73 games and it felt like it was inevitable that they were going to go on and win the title, although of course they eventually did not. And there's definitely a legacy there of really good regular season teams making the finals or having good postseason runs, but not necessarily winning the title. And I'm going to be very interested to see how this Celtics team, who has a lot of guys that have a ton of postseason experience, especially Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, deals with the pressure of not only being the 1 seed, but being as dominant as they were in the East this year. And it's just going to be a weird postseason for them, because they've had success against Milwaukee in the past, but you're certainly not excited about playing against Giannis in the postseason. Philly, if they can, make it out of the play-in and figure out their situation moving forward, they are going to be a tough matchup for any team, certainly with Joel Embiid back. And it's just weird to play a team that hasn't had their best guy all year and presumably is healthy and fresh and ready to go. And it just creates this weird situation around the Celtics where, from a lot of advanced metrics and of course the individual win total, it's a dominant team. And I do believe that they are the title favorite. And I do think that even against a team like Denver or Minnesota or Oklahoma City or the Clippers, despite the fact the Clippers haven't been playing well down the stretch here, I do think that they would be the favorites in that series. It's just crazy to think about how dominant they've been in the regular season, yet the expectation level, I think, is kind of tempered for Boston for a lot of different reasons. And as we talked about before about the Celtics, anytime you have a lot of postseason pressure, it also puts a lot of pressure on your offseason, right? I mean, if for whatever reason they lose in the second round or they lose in the conference finals with this dominant of a regular season team, and you have, some offseason question marks, Drew Holiday being an upcoming free agent, the amount of money that they're spending on the roster, Joe Mazzulla as, a young head coach, someone that has the record for best record to start a coaching career ever as a head coach in the NBA. If they don't have success in the postseason, there could be some question marks there as well. And so it's interesting how right now, handful of games left in the regular season, dominant regular season, 15-game lead on the 1 seed in the conference, feels like there's a lot of positive momentum going for Boston right now. And it's interesting how quickly that can change based off how they perform in the postseason. And as I've talked about on this channel before, it is going to come down to shot making. If a team is going to have a chance in a series against Boston, even some of those really good teams in the West, it has to be because Boston isn't hitting the amount of shots that they have during the regular season. If they shoot regular season volume and efficiency from 3-point range, the Celtics are going to win the NBA title. I've said that for 2 months now. And so we'll see if that actually ends up happening. That is a very high bar. It's one of the main reasons they've been so successful. But if it happens, it's going to be very, very tough for any team to beat this team. But that's why the NBA playoffs are exciting. We see crazy stuff like this every single year. There's no reason the Heat should be as successful as they are every single year in the postseason. There's a lot of stuff that can happen. I'm very excited to see how this regular season dominance translates to the playoffs for the Celtics.